Welcome to another edition of the SaaStrana podcast. Today we have with us Raghu, founder of Sprinto. Sprinto is in the business of making it easy for companies to meet compliance. And hence, Raghu is an authoritative source to talk about various compliance needs and go into depth of the specific compliances that many companies have to meet for doing business. In this podcast, he is going to take a deeper dive on the SOC 2 compliance, which is it is a must-have imperative for any SaaS companies to do business and acquire customers. Raghu is going to talk about what SOC 2 is, what are all some of the pitfalls that companies has to avoid when they start up to make sure they are ready. He's going to give us a very nice summary and brief, call it a SOC 2 primer, and also some of the differences and different types of SOC compliances, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, and the different types that are on each of those compliances. Welcome to the SaaStrana podcast, Raghu.
Thank you so much.
So Raghu, can you, just for the benefit of the audience, can you introduce yourself and your company, Sprinto, what it does?
Sure. Thanks so much, Venkatesh, for having me here. So I'm an engineer first, actually wrote most of the early code at Sprinto. Second, I'm founder. In the previous company, I had the official title of a CTO. This time around, I do more than just being on the technology side, but at my previous company, RecruiterBox, I was purely handling the responsibilities of a CTO there. RecruiterBox was a B2B SaaS business. We were largely SMB based. And as we tried getting more and more upmarket, we got pushed into security compliances. We kicked the can down the road quite a bit, eventually couldn't ignore it and had to take the plunge and start doing, compliances the traditional way. And that's how I got introduced into this whole space about what Sprinto is doing today. So if I have to put it in short, Sprinto is what I would have loved to have at the time at which we were going through this process at RecruiterBox. So now let me just quickly introduce Sprinto itself. So Sprinto automates security compliances like SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI, GDPR. In fact, we have support for over 15 standards. From a CTO standpoint, what used to usually take months is of manual effort in order to get compliances is now literally possible in a few weeks, right? And the effort is 1/10 what it used to be. And this enables many small companies to go after big ticket deals, which was not really possible before, right? So we essentially enable or level the playing field as far as certain larger deals are concerned.
Okay. So basically, compliance as a service. Is that fair to say? You're a SaaS service provider for compliance as a service, enabling other businesses, including SaaS companies. Yes.
It's a reasonable way of describing it. I would potentially try and name the space as compliance automation, and that's what we play in.
Compliance automation. Okay, yeah. Okay, you're automating the service part of the compliance as a service. Okay, fair enough. All right.
Yes.
Good, very interesting story. Like any other startups, and it's always for me fascinating to hear how a company got formed, because there is always a story on, there has to be a tingle, there has to be a spark, which forces you to say, oh, the world can be a better place if we solve this problem, which is making my life a lot. And in your case, that aha moment or the tingle was in your previous SaaS company startup as a CTO. And you had to go through this process of compliances in that SaaS startup, and Sprinto was born.
Yep. In fact, I vividly remember trying to talk to a lot of consultants, trying to read online about how to go about this whole process. That was the time when GDPR was making a lot of noise. Or there was a lot of noise around GDPR, and we were trying to see what it takes to get to GDPR compliance. Eventually, I realized after talking to a lot of consultants that I started understanding a lot of the nuances of the space better than what they were talking about, essentially because SaaS itself was not a very evolved space at the time. And what these compliances meant in the context of a SaaS company wasn't very well understood at that point in time. So as a CTO of a SaaS company, I had a very different take about how to meet certain requirements of these standards.
Fantastic. And I think as a SaaS, I'm in the security space, enabling others to meet their compliance requirement where it pertains to security. But being a SaaS company ourselves, we have to go through a lot of compliance checklists and other things, PCI DSS, and being in the cloud SOC 2. I want to pick on SOC 2. If you had to pick, what is the number one compliance headache or common thing that happens across all companies? Is it fair to say it's SOC 2? SOC 2 is a very common requirement.
It is. It is the most. It is growing quite fast now. I would probably classify that answer or dive into the answer a little bit. If I look at US, for example, SOC 2 is growing quite fast. If I were to think about Europe and India as markets, I would think ISO is growing quite fast.
Okay. And that is the thing about these standards, right? There are too many of them to choose from. It's a paradox of standards, they call it. The biggest pain point of standards is way too many of them to choose from. And I think very recently I saw an initiative from NIST cybersecurity framework standard, where one of the compelling call to action they are asking is to provide a mapping between standards. Because you might be meeting ISO 27000 as an example here. There are a lot of things on ISO 27001 which can be mapped to specific items in SOC 2. But I want to pick on SOC 2. And if you were to explain, I know it was a standard that was created by a bunch of accountants, AICPA or something, right? But for a layman, or anybody listening, if you want to give them a SOC 2 primer, what is SOC 2 compliance in a nutshell? What would be your take on it?
Yeah, let me just get the basics out. Like, you already said some of that, but I'll just, for the sake of completeness, say it again. So SOC 2 is a security standard written and maintained by AICPA. It's an American body. Like you said, it is CPAs who have come together and written this, right? But the important part about why CPAs have written this is the thing to understand about SOC 2 is that it is a third-party audited framework. In the sense that when you get SOC 2 compliant, you need a third-party auditor to come in and review your environment to eventually issue a SOC 2 report, right? There is a lot of training that CPAs go through on how to do audits, which is essentially what brings together the security compliance and how like a bunch of accountants are writing like a security standard, right? It's the audit procedure that matters, and they do this in a particular manner, which essentially lends a lot of credibility to SOC 2 out in the market, right? That auditing procedure is fairly rigorous. Which is what lends it the credibility of it. Now, to give you like a high level understanding of what SOC 2 itself is, see, end of day, it's a bunch of guidelines broken down into a few areas, right? But the important thing to understand about SOC 2, or at least the misconception that I come across very often in young companies, is that they believe SOC 2 is about their infrastructure or just about their engineering team. It's not the case. SOC 2 is a holistic framework. It covers your people, processes, how you do changes in your organization, as well as your infrastructure and some of the technical aspects of things. So it's like it's an all-encompassing framework, and it looks at security from from all angles.
Okay.
Right, like simple things like background checks on employees, or the fact that employees should acknowledge policies when they join the company, don't come into our head as security. But they are part of these compliances and an important aspect of how to enable a company to remain secure over time.
Okay. Good. So is this a certification or is it just a framework of self-compliance and report that you produce? Is it a certificate? Is there something called SOC 2 certification or is it just a report that you self-comply with?
Yeah. It's a little bit of a nuance. SOC 2 is not called a certificate; it's called a report.
Okay.
It's a report issued by a certified AICPA certified audit partner. It's called a report, and it's not called a certificate. ISO is called a certificate, but end of day it has to be issued and signed by a certified AICPA audit certified auditor.
And SOC 2, I'm assuming there is something called SOC 1 then, or is it directly
Yes.
SOC 2? There is SOC 1.
No, there is a SOC 1 as well. SOC 1 is used more in financial audits. Okay. It is an answer to there's a regulation, government regulation in the US that happened, which public companies have to follow. I think in around 2003-2004 timeframe. SOC 1 was an answer to it in order to enable companies to do audits once and get like a report and use it with multiple use cases. So SOC 1 is used in a financial audit scenario. SOC 2 is used from a technical security audit scenario.
So SOC 1 is finance audit and SOC 2 is more from a company audit. Is it fair to say it's a company audit, technical included, or?
No, both are inclusive and both are holistic in the sense that they look at the controls across the company. But SOC 2 is more information security related.
Okay. Yeah, fundamentally, all these audits, what they provide is it's assurance, right? I mean, it's all about getting trust. SaaS by its very nature is trying to get our customers to place their trust on us for a service that we are solving. And this assurances enables those trust. And I think you covered you covered the differences between SOC 1 and SOC 2 very well. And it's now I know why SOC 2 is also written by CPAs, because SOC 1, it makes sense. It's financial audit. So obviously we'd expect a CPA to write it, but they extended that also to SOC 2.
Yes.
And probably they've done a good job because, as you rightly said, they understand the auditing part of the framework better.
Yes. In fact, what happens in SOC 2 as compared to, let's say, some of the other standards is that SOC 2, it gives out a very long report where each of the security measures that you have in your company are listed down in that report, and it clearly states how the auditor tested that particular security measure and what were the observations of the auditor. So for a person on the other side, on your customer side, who's reading this report, it's a lot of detail that they have in terms of what are the things that you're doing in order to ensure that you're keeping their data safe and secure. And it's also audited by a third party, which essentially gives them a lot of confidence.
Okay. Great. I come from my career started off with the cryptography and in the security field, and I have been through FIPS validation. So in FIPS, for example, there is level 1, level 2, and so forth. Is there something similar in SOC as well? Level 1, level 2, type 1, type 2. Are there different grades in the SOC 1, SOC 2 reports?
There is a type 1 and a type 2. Usually type 1 is, you can consider it easier to get simply because it's looking at on a single day, are your security measures in place? It's like examining a photograph, right? Mm-hmm. While type 2 is by definition something that you are reviewing about the presence of your security measures over a period of time. It's like reviewing a video, right? Like type 1 is like looking at single frame of the video and saying that all the security measures are in place, while type 2 is ensuring that you have all the security measures in place over a period of time, which is where ensuring that your security practices are continuously running, collecting evidence of the fact that these are running. Having a product like Sprinto obviously helps a lot in these kind of situations.
I am certainly going to put you in touch with my compliance officer. It's certainly something before this podcast, once I found out what you guys do, and I'm learning a lot about compliances, but certainly we'll give it a try.
Awesome.
Yeah. So type 1 and type 2. So fundamentally, type 1 is a point in type snapshot, and type 2 is how mature are you? I mean, type 2 is higher. I mean, have you instituted that point in time snapshot to be a habit and you retain a steady state on a continuous basis?
Yes.
Is there any higher level? It's just type 1, type 2?
No,
or just,
it's just type 1, type 2.
Okay. And it applies
just for complete. Just for completeness sake, right? There is a SOC 3 as well, which is usually what you get when you have like a SOC 2. SOC 3 is like a shareable version, which you can put it out publicly. It has less information than a SOC 2, but in general, it can be used to display publicly. SOC 2, it has such a level of detail in it that you would not want to share it unless you're sharing it with somebody under an NDA.
Okay. All right. Okay. So SOC 3 is a lighter version. So to make life confusing, SOC 1 and SOC 2. Within that, there is type 1 and type 2. And there is SOC 3, even though the version number changes, it is a lightweight version of SOC 2 for it to be shareable.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so if you get SOC 2, you automatically get SOC. So SOC 3 is just a shareable document of SOC 2, right? Is it fair to say?
Yes. It is reasonable understanding, but usually, auditors, when they're issuing a SOC 3 report, do charge you separately for it.
Okay. All right. We all want to figure out ways to make money. Cross-sell, upsell. So it's no different from the compliance auditors as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, you guys make this entire process for the auditor to ask lesser questions. For a company that is going through an audit process, that's where Sprinto fits in, right? That's why you probably have such a wealth of domain knowledge on this.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So tell me, I live and breathe SaaS as a SaaS company, and most of my customers are also SaaS companies. And I keep hearing compliances, SOC 1, SOC 2, GDPR, PCI DSS. We are PCI DSS certified. We are hosted in a SOC 2 data center. But why is SOC 2 important specifically to the SaaS companies? I mean, of course, it is important to any companies, but I just wanted to carve out SaaS companies and want to hear your views. And what does it mean to a SaaS company?
Yeah. So these days, I'm noticing in the market that SOC 2 is table stakes for you to close mid-market and enterprise sales, right? Mm-hmm. Beyond a certain ticket size, in SaaS specifically, what's happening is without having like a SOC 2 report, it's becoming extremely difficult to sell in the US market. And if you really think about it from your customer standpoint, it's easy to understand why. As a SaaS company, my customers' data is on my servers, right? And they are naturally worried about what are the security processes that I have in place in order to ensure that I'm protecting their data, right? So SOC 2 becomes like a really nice way for them to understand the security practices in place in your company and have third-party validation of the fact that these security practices are not just there today, but they are continuing to run on a regular basis.
Yeah. Good. So SaaS companies themselves should get SOC 2 audited reports, or the fact that they are hosted in a SOC 2 certified data center, is there enough, or they themselves have to look at getting SOC 2 certification?
Yeah, I think the short answer there is you need to get a SOC 2 certification for your company as well. But it is fairly common for very young companies to host themselves in a SOC 2 certified infra provider like an AWS or an Azure or GCP and get by without a SOC 2 report for a while. And for your first few beta customers or your pilot projects, you should be able to get through without a SOC 2 report. But that depends a lot on your luck in terms of how much your sponsor in your enterprise customer is willing to support you on that, and what's the criticality of the data they are sharing with you. as the criticality of the data they're sharing, even for a pilot project increases, it becomes harder and harder without a SOC 2 report.
And as I said, again, these are assurances to your customer who is buying you over the cloud. But this third-party report, we play this game also because we provide security reports which enable assurances that our customers are taking security seriously, proactively. How long does a SOC 2 compliance take? How long does it take?
Yeah, interesting question, actually. So let me just give some context before I answer that question, Venkatesh. See, I think what's happened over the last couple of years is that a lot of companies have started following better and better security practices in general when they start setting up their infrastructure on AWS, because a lot of best practices and recipes have started coming out. Now, in that context, today I'm seeing most SaaS companies have reasonable security practices set up already, which essentially means that if they are putting their back into it and prioritizing this project, it can get done in a couple of weeks to 3 weeks for them to be ready for the audit. The audit itself takes another couple of weeks, but essentially speaking, from the time you say, okay, I'm going to focus on this and get it done, to the point of actually having like a report that you can share with your customers, it's about 5 to 6 weeks.
And is there anything you can do to save time and effort on this? Of course, you're going to say use Sprinto.
Yes, these are the timelines if you use automation like Sprinto. But generally, this process used to take in the range of 4 to 6 months without a product like Sprinto.
Okay, but Sprinto reduces the window of time needed to be ready for compliance and audit. But independent of as a habit, as a new SaaS founder or somebody who's a new SaaS founder, what are some of the best practices that you would ask them to do to be ready for this ground up? Are there anything that you can advise them?
Yeah, see, generally speaking, it is always better to start with these processes early on in your life cycle, because as more and more employees join the company, it becomes harder and harder to adopt new practices. There are things you need to do when you're setting up your infrastructure. Basic things. It's not like a large number of things that you have to re-architect or anything, but just having those practices. See, having like the right security measures around how you SSH into your machines. Right, there is a standard best practice that Sprinto recommends for you to take. But setting this up when you have like 20 or 30 developers on team and you have like a certain practice associated with it, it's harder to change. But if you set it up early on, it's better developer experience because it's a lot more automated with Sprinto. It's better process in terms of security. It leaves less vulnerabilities open in your system, etc. But it's just simply easier to set these up when you're starting young. So in general, the big recommendation that we tend to make is that people should start early. And the second thing that is useful is for somebody from the senior leadership to pay attention to this during the setup, because end of day, it's a company-wide framework. It impacts everybody in the company, and the messaging top-down makes a huge difference to how long it takes.
Any mistakes that people do? Of course, not paying attention to it, but what are some of any mistakes? I know one, which is I'm in a SOC 2 certified data center. So hence SOC 2 is not relevant. Is there any mistakes that comes to your mind? That with
some of the common pitfalls. Some of the common pitfalls I tend to see is people thinking that they have to re-architect their systems, or people thinking that this is going to take so much time away from my regular running of the business that I'm going to kick the can down the road and see later on what needs to happen, and consequently lose a lot of deals. And that hurt will eventually make you realize that this is something that we have to get it done, which is what also did.
That's when the top-down messaging happens that you're talking about, right? Once you start losing deals.
Yes.
But a very interesting point, because if you institute these habits ground up, it's actually not a deviation away from your core work. It's just a way of doing your core work, that they become a habit and it doesn't get in the way of what you're doing, right? So
yes. See, actually, if you think about it, many SOC 2 practices are very well aligned with some of the standard good dev practices, like having tests, right? Or ensuring that peer reviews are happening when code is changing, right? If you really, or having like good SSH practices into your servers, so that when somebody leaves the company, they're not having an SSH key that's lying around. In general, most SOC 2 practices enable you to follow the right practices for you, which make you efficient over time. But it's just that compliance has this this reputation that people are afraid about, this is going to slow me down kind of thing. In general, with automation tools like Sprinto, a lot of that has already changed.
And SOC 2, is it only restricted to infrastructure, or is it also to the applications that is running on the infrastructure? It's also specific to application.
Usually you don't have to have any installations inside your servers in order to for Sprinto to install something inside your servers. But we might rely on AWS Inspector, for example, running on your AWS instances to do vulnerability scans on your AWS instances.
I understand. My question was more along the lines of the SOC 2, the framework, the SOC 2 compliance checklist. Is it covers policies and processes only with respect to infrastructures, or is it also extend to, let's say there is a piece of code that is running on the infrastructure? Is it also cover any kind of application and software related security practices as well? Is my question.
It covers anything and everything that can impact the security of data. So for example, the code that is processing the data that's coming from your customers is within scope. So you'll have to ensure that it is scanned for vulnerabilities, and the vulnerabilities are fixed within a certain amount of time. You need to have processes to ensure that no single person in the company can make any malicious changes to that code and push it to your production. So you need to have peer reviews enforced, right? If peer reviews are not enforced, you need to get alerted about it. So all of these things is what Sprinto manages.
I'm tearing up a little bit because SOC 2 also talks about application security, and which is what we do.
Yes.
Tears of joy, right? So, and it's something that I find in all compliance checklists, right? Not just SOC 2. Application is central to your business, and security of the application, doing vulnerability assessment, protecting it. So it's good. I think that's no wonder where, because SOC 2 is growing in the US, I'm also seeing a growth to our services in the US market, because it is needed for meeting those compliances. Sprinto makes the entire process easy, but one of the checklists from that process, which is specific to application, we make it easy, right? And we all in the same space somewhat. We talked a lot about SOC 2. Are there, if you were to lay down, what are the top compliances besides SOC 2 that you think a SaaS company will have to look for?
I think that's answer is a little bit nuanced, Venkatesh. So if you look at smaller companies which are targeting the US as a market, I would recommend SOC 2 as the primary framework to go after. It lays the foundation for you to get more things done as you need. For example, if you're capturing a lot of privacy, individual information from California, then CCPA applies to you, but a significant portion of your requirements are covered by SOC 2. If you're going into the European market, then you might need ISO 27001, at which point SOC 2 again is like a good base layer for you to be able to build ISO on top of it, because platforms like Sprinto also ensure that there is a lot of reuse between the security measures that you've implemented in your company. Whatever you've done for SOC 2 can be reused for ISO as well, right? Similarly for GDPR. As a company tends to get larger and they go into specific industries, like let's say they're selling to healthcare organizations, then you'll need to do HIPPA. If you're selling to fintech companies and you're getting access to some financial information, especially credit card information, you'll have to do PCI DSS. If you're selling to governments, then FedRAMP becomes important. Federal organizations in the US, FedRAMP becomes important, right? So it becomes a little bit industry specific beyond a certain point. And there are like you said in the beginning, there are like a ton of compliances or standards across the board, right? So that comes down to the industry you're selling to.
And I think one of the previous podcasts I did, even an industry which is dealing largely with unregulated data. I mean, I was having a podcast with a SaaS company dealing with the construction vertical. They enable builders and construction vertical to do better drawing for, I mean, the entire digitization of the workflow in the construction vertical, right? And that vertical, largely unlike fintech and health and other things, is doesn't deal with regulated data. But even they are forced to somehow embrace compliance, because guess what? Can a SaaS system function without having integration with financial systems, which has regulated data? And they, for the integration to happen, are forcing compliance checklists to be done. So it was a very interesting. So I think the moment you have finance and PI and information, largely the trickle-down effects of regulated data will get across all industries, including the so-called unregulated industries.
Yes. Like I said, compliances are becoming table stakes for companies to sell these days. So I think that third-party trust is becoming an increasingly important ingredient to start to do business in the SaaS ecosystem.
Fantastic. I think that was, I mean, we just covered SOC 2, but I think we can, given the space you are in, we can probably talk a little bit more in detail about other compliance topics as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Raghu from Sprinto, which is in the business of providing compliance automation. Did I get it right? That compliance as a service companies can use to provide better enhanced services. And other companies can meet their compliance needs faster. So thank you, Raghu. It was a pleasure discussing with you and know a little bit more about the SOC 2 compliance specifically.
Pleasure is mine, Venkatesh. Have a nice day.